Kia ora, talofa, namaste, haere mai, and welcome to our Monday niche cast coming at you on Monday, the 6th of November. Fabulous Aotearoa sporting times once again. I would say this weekend was a bit better than last weekend. Last weekend we did get Kiwi Ferns, that was epic. But this weekend we got the Kiwis, 2 Wellington Phoenix wins, and of course the Duckworth, Lewis and Steve having a good old win for Pakistan with the Blackcaps at the World Cup, the Cricket World Cup, and we're here to chat through most of that stuff. We're from the Niche Cache, theniche-cache.com, where you can read about these Aotearoa sporting matters in depth. I've got a Aotearoa Kiwis versus Australia debrief. We've got 2 Kiwi Ferns yarns as well. I did write about the Adam Whenua-Blake saga along the same lines as Josh Curran a few weeks ago. So you can check in with Aotearoa Warriors matters. Do have the Kiwi NRL juniors who helped Australia teams win. That's live on our website. Lots of rugby league content. It's not rugby league season, but we still got lots of rugby league content live on the website at the moment. There'll be National League yarns coming up, and there'll be some cricket. Plunkett Shield cricket is happening at the moment. Round 3 has started, and we will check in for a deep dive with the Blackcaps World Cup campaign. That is all on our website, theniche-cache.com. And this is a Monday, so we are sending out our newsletter via Substack, theniche-cache.substack.com. I've offered a few Blackcaps stats, couple wrinkles, couple of bits and bobs, but one funky thing I am tracking, in tune with the growth of Aotearoa Rugby League, a young Kiwi NRL juniors who play in the halves who are signed to Australian teams and or the Warriors. Because we are getting some of these junior squads, SG Ball and Mal Meninga Cup primarily. Those squads are being announced, and I am tracking all Kiwi NRL juniors in those teams. But with the growth of Aotearoa Rugby League, we used to struggle to produce halves from Aotearoa. Now the Kiwis have won, with one half from Whangarei Dylan Brown, one half from Wellington Jerome Hughes in their team, and there's high quality halves in Australian systems as well as the Warriors that I have highlighted in our Monday newsletter. Nico the Wildcard, any ideas on what you're dishing up in your Monday newsletter dispatch?
Well, I dare say there'll be some Wellington Phoenix chat in there. Certainly, probably a bit on the men and the women. There's both topics that we're also going to hit later on in this podcast. So, no doubt I'll be able to spin off a few extra lines on that. And I'm thinking maybe it might be a good opportunity to peek around the rest of the A League and see what some Kiwis are doing. Probably more so in the women than in the blokes, because there's not a lot going on for the fellas. But we did get a Millie Clegg debut this week. She went off injured after 55 minutes against for Western Sydney Wanderers, but it didn't look like a bad injury. It looked like she sort of like was running in behind and collided with the goalkeeper, and probably more a bruising kind of thing that was going to be a bit tricky to run off rather than anything else. But good start. Didn't score a goal, but had a lot of involvement. She's running in behind the defensive line plenty. So I'm hopeful for that being a fruitful partnership for this season, Millie Clegg and Western Sydney Wanderers.
So happy birthday, Millie Clegg. Here's an injury.
Yeah.
Beauty.
Yeah.
So that's coming out on our Substack newsletter. Those are sent out every Monday and Friday. Mandatory viewing, reading for you Aotearoa sporting freaks, nerds, and whatever else you want to call yourself if you love Aotearoa sport. We will be doing our subscriber podcast this week as well, probably after the 3rd round of Plunkett Shield. That way we can get into our weekly groove of going deep into Plunkett Shield cricket as well as deep into National League cricket. That seems to be the go for the subscriber podcast at the moment. But we do welcome any comments, questions, queries from our Patreon whānau and those with a paid Substack subscription who can then access our subscriber podcast. The subscriber podcast is a bit of a VIP section for the generous folk who do fund the niche cache and support us straight up the guts, running it straight like Fisher Harris, Tapane, Leota, Asafa Solomona, Neem, Thompson, and any other Kiwis bloke who runs it straight, or any footballer. Some of the footballers run it straight as well, so shout out to them. But we run it straight with our subscriber podcast for those who support us. And that is the best way to support the niche cache directly. You can join the Patreon whānau, patreon.com/EL niche cache, L niche cache, and access the subscriber podcast every week through Patreon. Or you can upgrade your Substack newsletter subscription, which is completely free for 2 in-depth newsletters every week. You can upgrade that for a paid Substack subscription, and then you get access to the subscriber podcast through Substack every week as well. That's the niche cache. We're out here. The website, the newsletters, podcasts. We're covering the Aotearoa sporting matters that you won't find anywhere else, really, because apparently the All Black stuff is still loitering in the media headlines. And to be honest, I find it quite funny how a lot of the Kiwi media, they're talking about sports stuff around the world. And they don't even care about National League football. They don't care about Plunket Shield cricket. They barely care about the Phoenix, let alone in-depth rugby league analysis as well. That's what the niche cache is here for. But before we get into any of that, we need some mindfulness. Chief, what do you got? Chiefy.
Well,
Chiefy Italiano. Chief.
I wish I had some Chiefy mindfulness, but I haven't listened to his press conference yet from after the win. I'm going to do that afterwards, and maybe that'll be one of the things that bleeds into my the Phoenix write-ups in the email. Him and Paul Temple, because I'm fascinated by how those two coaches are approaching this season. Like, genuinely fascinated. I just want to hear them talk all the time. But we'll save that bit for later on. I have a bit of mindfulness from someone who I can't remember who said it, because it wasn't a very good quote how they said it. So I paraphrased it, and I'm just going to attribute it, not to myself, because that's cheating, but I'll attribute it to just anonymous. You know how they do that? We don't know who said it, so it's just someone unknown. And the quote went, if it's out of your hands, put it out of your mind.
The old chestnut of control what you can control. And if you got to let go of the uncontrollables and just focus on what you can control. If it's out of your hands, put it out of your mind.
Yeah, I don't know how when I saw it, the way it was written, it was like, if it's out of your hands, then it should also be free of your mind, or something dumb like that. It's like, some of the mindfulness quotes, some of these like guru types, they speak like poets, and everything they say, it sounds so much more useful because they've said it in this flowing, poetic kind of way. And then other people just kind of talk like business folks, and that stuff's not so easily absorbed because it just sounds like the stuff you hear all the time from, scrolling through Twitter or whatever. So sometimes those things need to be adjusted. But the kernel of truth within that is an excellent one. Control the controllables.
Perfecto. The Kiwis win over Australia was pretty fantastic, 30-0. And the Kiwis now have their last 2 games against Australia in Aotearoa, they have won. They've also put up 80-0 in their last 2 games in Aotearoa. So maybe Aotearoa is a fortress of rugby league, considering how the Kiwis are performing in Aotearoa. I think the previous win over Australia was at Mount Smart. I think it was 2018. And then they lost in 2019 over in Sydney. Then you had the pandemic, and then I think a lot of people forget how close the Kiwis versus Kangaroos World Cup semi-final was. Off the top of my head, the result was 14-16, and the Kiwis were winning until a late try to Australia. So the Kangaroos, Australia won the World Cup, and everyone celebrated that for Australia. But the semi-final highlighted how close these teams were. And then obviously Australia won that game in Melbourne, which, I don't know, like I'm finding it harder to go all in on the Blackcaps holding a few things back during the World Cup through that run of games that they lost, include 4 losses in a row now, holding things back for the semi-final. But I'm pretty confident the Kiwis didn't go full hundies over in Australia against the Kangaroos in the loss in Melbourne, knowing that the Pacific Championship final was the next weekend in Aotearoa, where the Kiwis absolutely destroyed Australia in a glorious performance, which, if we're being honest, given everything we know about Kiwi NRL juniors and the rising number of Kiwi NRL juniors in Australian teams, let alone the Warriors, and the growing number of young wahine from Aotearoa entering NRLW systems, then we've got the performance of Kiwi NRL players in the NRL, performances of the NRL wahine as well as New Zealand Warriors being all right this season. Now, then we've got 2 really impressive Kiwi Ferns performances, 1 loss, 1 victory, featuring 2 second halves in which the Kiwi Ferns didn't concede any points. Then we've got the Kiwis defeating Australia. Bit of a hot take. I think Aotearoa is a better rugby league nation right now. Of course, Australia think they run rugby league. However, I suggested we were Blackcaps truthers last week, and I'm pretty confident in my perception of Aotearoa Rugby League, and you can call me an Aotearoa Rugby League truther because Aotearoa runs rugby league right now. We're better than Australia. We got better juniors. We got better international teams. New Zealand Warriors are humming. Penrith Panthers, 3-time champions. Who are their starting props? James Fisher-Harris and Moses Leota. Like, every layer of rugby league at the moment features Aotearoa dominance. And that was on display, 30-0 in Hamilton. If you're worried about the crowds, chill out. Like, the one stand you could see that was empty was the one stand on the other side of the cameras, let alone the fact that the Kiwis need to earn those crowds. The Kiwis need to win consistently and play a lot more tests. Like, we won't get into that. The Kiwis need to win consistently to earn those big crowds, and they haven't played a whole lot of rugby league in Aotearoa, let alone winning test matches consistently to earn those crowds. So don't worry about the crowd numbers. This is just the beginning. And that is a key wrinkle here. This is just the beginning of Aotearoa Rugby League's rise. And having been closely tuned into this rise, otherwise known as the Kiwi NRL takeover, which goes far beyond the Kiwi NRL takeover because it's NRLW, it's Aotearoa Kiwis, it's Aotearoa Kiwi Ferns. I'm pretty chuffed at the moment. Great times for Aotearoa Rugby League.
Yeah, absolutely massive to get big wins over Australia for both the national teams just in consecutive weeks. Like, that's the kind of thing that, because they don't get to play that often, especially the Kiwi Ferns, but the Kiwis don't get to play very often either. Like, they didn't even have a mid-year test this year. No, they didn't, did they? And like, that's also part of the reason why there wasn't as big of a crowd as they probably would have hoped for in Hamilton, is because it's out of sight, out of mind kind of stuff. It's like, how do you build up hype for a team that hasn't played there for ages and it just lost the week before? And it's tricky. And the way to overcome that, and I'm no doubt might even mention this exact same thing when we come around to the Phoenix later on, is just win, be exciting, show that you're worth turning up for, and that it's it's money well spent to go and see these players live, that it's an experience you're not going to forget. Well, how better to do that than to deal Australia I think I read it was their biggest ever loss, or at least their biggest ever shutout loss. I didn't look further into it, but astonishing stuff. Like it was an astonishing game to watch because you just keep thinking like, well, the comeback's coming soon, right? Well, there's Australia's dropped the ball again, or well, here's Ronaldo Mulatalo doing something amazing again. Like, what were we up to? In attack and defense as well. The hit he put on Valentine Holmes was my favorite part of the whole game. And the favorite part of a game in which the Kiwis scored 30 unanswered points. Although second favorite was Griffin Neame running it straight and gone in late on. That was awesome.
Got to push back on that because he did offer the Greymouth shuffle. He didn't run it straight. He put on a little.
Oh yeah,
footer.
okay. No, you're right. That's fair. The Greymouth shuffle from Greymouth Griff. Love it. Fantastic. That was like the icing on the cake moment as well, because it was at that point where you're like, oh yeah, well, I guess the Kiwis haven't just won this game, they've thrashed them. This is amazing. I honestly I can't remember another Kiwis test quite like that against Australia. Like we've seen it against other nations, of course, but to do that to Australia is something else. And yeah, Australia was well below par, but also part of the way you get a team to be below par against you is by putting them under pressure right from the very beginning. And the Kiwis just did that. Like obviously they scored first because Australia never scored at all, but they scored relatively early, I think. They had them under pressure for quite a while too. Like they set it up so nicely. It was such a, I don't know, it was a fantastic win. What more can you say? It was a fantastic win.
Two things that sum up Aotearoa Kiwis Rugby League, and to me they sum up the pride and passion for playing for Aotearoa and setting the tone for what it means to represent Aotearoa Rugby League. And also credit to Michael Maguire, because these players are doing this under Michael Maguire's coaching, and Michael Maguire, along with the senior players, they have created an environment, a culture where these two things happen. And these two things are Shans Nickel Klukstad playing with a broken rib, playing international test match rugby league with a broken rib. I think he was player of the match in the win over Australia. Like, you can play, it might be difficult, but you can play football with a broken rib, I reckon. It might be difficult, but you can play cricket with a broken rib. You just got to wear
the broken thumb.
Yeah, with a broken thumb. But you can, like, if you're batting, you can get a chest protector to protect your ribs. Might be tricky to bowl with a broken rib, but I'm sure you can do it. You're just running around. There aren't many people who are going to play rugby union or rugby league with a broken rib. There aren't many people who are going to do that in the NRL. And there aren't many jokers who are going to do that for an international test match and then win player of the match with a broken rib. Shans Nickel Klukstad did all of that. And I think that also highlights, you know, I wrote about the Whenua Blake saga, but the whole storyline I put out there was like, I'm not trying to convince folks or you that the Warriors can let Whenua Blake go and everything's all good. But how depressed and sad and downtrodden Warriors fans were, and the headlines. The headlines around the Whenua Blake saga were like, Warriors 2024 chances take a major blow with Whenua Blake wanting a release and all this stuff. Well, the Warriors are all good without Whenua Blake because he's one player. And the Warriors have a system. They got a club. They got a culture. They've got many other players who want that opportunity to be front and center, top 17 for the Warriors, let alone the fact that you've got someone like Nickel Klukstad as the heart and soul of the Warriors. Not to mention, this Kiwis team only had one Warriors player, so I'm pretty confident in my idea that the New Zealand Warriors do not represent Aotearoa Rugby League, because the Aotearoa Kiwis are winning test matches with one, maybe none, Aotearoa Warriors players. Like, that's still happening. That is to say, Nickel Klukstad is the heart and soul of the Warriors. And he showed how important he is to his teams, the Warriors and the Kiwis, by that performance against Australia. The other major factor here is the Kiwis defeated Australia with a dummy half combination of Kieran Foran and Fa'amanu Brown. Neither of them play a whole lot of dummy half in the NRL. Kieran Foran doesn't play dummy half in the NRL. He is a half. He is the Gold Coast Titans number 6, who then churned out consistently excellent performances at hooker for the Aotearoa Kiwis. Apparently, Fa'amanu Brown is not good enough to play NRL. He's off to the Super League now. So the Aotearoa Kiwis, like, you can talk about all the players missing for Australia, all this other stuff, all these other caveats for Australia. The Aotearoa Kiwis just defeated Australia with Kieran Foran and Fa'amanu Brown as their dummy halves. That is a credit to them. Like, Kieran Foran is an absolute soldier. I don't use those terms lightly. I actually cringe. This is a disclaimer for the niche case, because you mentioned the word murdered the other week in a podcast, and I was like, I noted that down because I was going to like bring that up with you off here. I was like, we don't use those terms, you know. We're not out here putting those terms out. Oh, he killed that guy. He got murdered. That was, you know, those type of words, I think, are American. We don't use those words. Like, we don't need to use those words, because if you use those words, you're putting those things out into the world. And I mean, given how often those words are used in American sports podcasts, it kind of, you can connect the dots between the amount of murders that happen and just the amount of people who use those words to describe sport. So can you just take that on the chin? And
hey, point noted. That's something I actually think about a lot when I write about, is that kind of like the sports versus war comparisons, like but you know, in a podcast, those things might slip out now and then, because as you say, it is something that yeah, I'm in agreement.
That is to say, like, I don't use the word soldier. I'm not gonna compare an athlete to a soldier. Kieran Foran is an absolute Kiwis trooper. He always plays for the Kiwis. And he is the most passionate Kiwi right now. He sets the tone for how passionate all these other players are about representing Aotearoa Kiwis. It starts with Kieran Foran. And he is a starting dummy half for Aotearoa Kiwis. Fa'amanu Brown has been through mud. He's just been walking through mud his whole career. Injuries, setbacks, not good enough for the NRL. Like, the Bulldogs had Fa'amanu Brown in their squad, in their starting 17, round 1. Fa'amanu Brown wasn't good enough for the Bulldogs, apparently. In all the infinite wisdom of Cameron Ciraldo and Phil Gould, Fa'amanu Brown was not good enough to hold down a top 17 spot for the Bulldogs. And then he went to the Knights. He plugged a hole in the Knights at the back end of the season. Now he's a fantastic player for the Kiwis. And like, Michael Maguire got the best out of Kieran Foran and Fa'amanu Brown in that situation. And those two examples are, like, if you have any concerns about Aotearoa Rugby League, just look at those two examples. That's how much it means for those players. And another little fun wrinkle that I keep throwing up is how many, pretty much most of those Aotearoa Kiwis that played against Australia, they are Kiwi NRL juniors. They play junior rugby league in Aotearoa. There's no wishy-washy like even the Origin players, Ronaldo Mulitalo, Ellerslie Jr. from Otara. And there was some stuff put out this week that Moses Leota played a little bit of footy for Mount Albert in Auckland before going to Sydney. I think Leota was the only one I was a bit iffy on as far as like a certified junior club in Aotearoa. Those Kiwis all have connections to the community. They all have grassroots heritage. And this is the new state of Aotearoa Rugby League, where blokes are playing with broken ribs, 2 players who weren't good enough for NRL dummy half duties. Well, Kieran Foran's too good. But the 2 blokes playing out of position did the job for the Kiwis. And anytime you can, as a coach, anytime you can get players to do a job and do that job at a higher level, it's a credit to the coach. It's a credit to the culture that is being cooked up by everyone involved, and it's a credit to Aotearoa Rugby League.
Yeah, and these things were more or less true before they beat Australia. At least, like, the foundations for them were true before they beat Australia. But you do every now and then need to beat Australia in order to so just to hammer it home so people realize. And also that is the way those things need to be judged as well. As Australia is the big dog that you gotta take down. And if you're gonna do that, like if you want to be remembered as a strong Kiwis team or a great era in Kiwis rugby league, you have to beat Australia now and then. Like, it's not necessarily every time. They're a very, very good team and they'll respond in kind. And, you know, they've got extreme wealth of players to call upon. And that's, you know, you can't ever. I remember us talking a little bit about this kind of thing prior to the game and the last podcast when we were previewing it. Like, you can't go in expecting to beat Australia, but you got to beat them now and then in order to show that you can, you know. And this was what they got. Like, the Kiwi Ferns did it 2 weeks ago. Kiwis did it on the weekend. Just the big statement victories to say, yeah, we're here and we're legit. And the Kiwis just did that. It's exactly like it's the perfect way to end an international rugby league season, isn't it? Even if the season only lasted like 3 weeks.
Like, ultimately, you need a win. It's wins and losses.
That is eventually what you get judged on.
I can big up the state of Aotearoa Rugby League. I can celebrate the New Zealand Warriors system under the 2 Andes. None of that matters if they don't win. If they don't win, then I'm just making shit up. And then I start to doubt like how I'm reading the situation. But when they win, and sports is about winning and losing, you know, those, I obviously think they're connected. Like, the state of Aotearoa Rugby League leads to winning games. A strong New Zealand Warriors system under the 2 Andes leads to winning games. But if they don't win, then you're kind of talking shit. Well, that's at least how it feels. Or
at least just like getting caught out with assumptions. You know, like but it's a weird one because you have to set things up in order to, like, how do I say this? Like, you have to set things up in order to get the outcome, but the outcome is the thing that you're judged upon, but you can't control the outcome. So it's a little bit of a weird one, but you can put yourself in the best position to get the outcome, if that makes some sense. Like, and there are plenty of examples throughout history of teams that would have been legendary had they won, and just for whatever reason it didn't happen. Bad luck sometimes. So sometimes it's stuff that had nothing to do with them. Everything was perfect except the stuff that they couldn't control. And then it's very hard to take the stuff that is out of your hands, out of your mind in that situation when, like, you've done all you can. But I don't know, Blackcaps 2019 probably a good example of that. It was like they basically won the World Cup, but they got none of the celebration and all of the devastation. But like, in another day, one of the many, many factors that go the other way could have gone the other way and they'd be champions. You know, it's sport is cruel like that. But the cruelty of it is part of it as well. And that's why those outcomes, like, you can't get overreactive to them, but also they're the only thing that matter. that makes sense, you know? It's a tricky one.
One last thing I want to highlight is there's always a lot of discussion about who the best prop is in the world. And to me, it's pretty obvious because one prop and his close comrade win. And that's Fisher Harris and Leota. They are the best props in the NRL. As a tandem, I think Fisher Harris is the best prop by himself. And Tapane was also fantastic for the Kiwis in this game. Part of my debrief, just quickly, was how he played 32 minutes against Samoa. First game against Australia, 55 minutes. Third game, 65 minutes. Joseph Tapane played 65 minutes straight at lock. The first game against Australia, he played 20-odd minutes and came off. So he had 2 stints. The final, he played 65 minutes straight, 19 runs, 197 meters, 10.3 meters per run. He was putting on Tuivasa Sheck footwork in the middle. He was putting on Griffin Neame footwork in the middle consistently. That is Joseph Tapane. He is fantastic. But Fisher Harris has won 3 grand finals in a row with Leota. Fisher Harris has defeated Australia. I'm pretty confident Fisher Harris would have played in that 2018 game as well. But Leota wasn't. So now with Leota, what's happening? The Kiwis are winning. Like, you can talk about any other prop you want. Whenua Blake, what's happening with Tonga in England? They lose. Who were the props for Australia? Payne Haas. Tino Fa'aso-Maleaui. What happened? They lost. What about those Pat Carrigan? Who does he play for? Australia and the Broncos. Payne Haas, Broncos. What happened to them in the final? They lost. Like, if you're talking about the best props in the world, in the game, you need to be winning footy games. And what does Fisher Harris do with Moses Leota? He wins. And it's pretty clear cut at the moment. There's not many other prop combinations who have won 3 NRL championships total. They've won 3 in a row. And they were the cornerstones of a Kiwis forward pack that put up, like Samoa. They got good props. They got good forwards. What happened to them? 50-0. Australia, they got good props. Best props in the world. Best forwards in the world. What happened to them? 30-0. Broncos, good props. Best 3 forwards in the NRL. What happened to them? Lost in the grand final. That's Fisher Harris. That's Moses Leota. Best props in the world. The Blackcaps need a win against Sri Lanka at the World Cup to keep things, well, to get things back on track, to be honest, because they've lost 4 games in a row. They were fantastic with the bat, less so with the ball. And as we said earlier, the old mates Duckworth, Lewis, and Steve, aka Stern, they decided that contest. How are you feeling about Blackcaps cricket heading into a must-win game against Sri Lanka?
Well, in a funny way, that Pakistan loss feels like a big step up from the South Africa loss. You know, the South Africa loss was the one game throughout this losing streak where they've been terrible in both innings. Here they were unreal with the bat. It's the second highest score the Blackcaps have ever got, and they missed out by like 1 or 2 runs on setting the record. I really thought they were going to do it there. I was actually a bit disappointed they didn't go past I think it was 402 that they got once upon a time, which I believe was the game against Ireland when Brendan McCullum and Hamish Marshall both got 150s, I think. But yeah, it's like not a game that's comparable to a potential, you know, to a World Cup ODI between 2 teams competing for the semi-finals. This was unreal. Incredible from Rachin Ravindra. Kane Williamson looked like, not only did he look like he'd never been gone, but he looked even better than he had been before the thumb injury. Like, he was unstoppable, and then just got a little bit too unselfish, which is the only. Sometimes you watch Kane Williamson bat and you think the only way you can stop him is if he stops himself because he decides that he's just not going to get greedy at it. Like going for a big 6, it wasn't to bring up his 100. You know, he was on 95, got caught on the boundary. He wasn't trying to bring up his 100 with a 6. He didn't care about his 100, or else he would have just continued to nurdle runs and would have had it within an over, you know? He just decided that at that point they had to hit the accelerator and keep going. And whether he lost his wicket in the process, no dramas, because Mark Chapman will come in and smack a quick fire 40-odd. Glenn Phillips will come in and smack a quick fire 40-odd. Daryl Mitchell will get a couple away as well, you know? Like, he just he got into unselfish mode and cost himself a century, but helped us set up a 400 run first innings. That was incredible. At that point, I was thinking like, well, I've just watched the Phoenix do a double header, double victory, 6-pointer. Just watched the Kiwis with one of their best ever performances, probably. Now the Blackcaps are going to do the same thing, like turn it all around, and then they didn't. And but at the same time, it kind of doesn't feel like they lost that game in a weird way. Like it was an example as much as anything as one of those spots where the Duckworth, Lewis, Stern, Steve system isn't quite fit for purpose, because often that's really good at just proving like a team was well ahead of the run rate. They were cruising towards victory. Only the rain stopped them, blah, blah, blah. Here was an example of Pakistan were ahead of the run rate. They were scoring, like they were batting absolutely brilliant. Like Fakhar Zaman was unreal. Like everything was said about Kane Williamson and Rachin Ravindra, he was even better than both of them. Like it was, and apparently that's like the 400 he scored against New Zealand this year or something, because we've played a couple of ODI series against them. There was one, I think they went to Pakistan twice, and he keeps scoring hundreds against us, and somehow I think got dropped in between Pakistan selectors being Pakistan selectors, but whatever. However, they were halfway to a 400 run total. As incredible as that had been what they'd done, they had to repeat it again. One wicket, and that changes. We know what the Pakistan batting lineup's like. You know, if you get Babar Azam out, is Fakhar Zaman just going to score 250? You know, is he just going to go out there and get the highest ever ODI score? Couldn't have ruled it out at that point, but it's still unlikely. And it was unlikely that they were going to win from that spot, despite the fact that they were ahead of the run rate at that point. But that's not how the Duckworth, Lewis, Stern, Steve stuff works. So it was an awkward one, because I don't think it necessarily gave a fair reflection of a game that was in the balance. But because it was in the balance in a high scoring one, the team batting second got the advantage. It was, I don't know, it was a little bit of an odd one. But it wouldn't be Blackcaps at the World Cup without some weird sort of rules going against them, would it? And the thing that struck me during that as well is I was watching thinking, you know, Kane Williamson had come back from injury, and think Kane Williamson suffering two separate injuries that have disrupted his thing. Matt Henry was out and is out of the tournament now, so Kyle Jamison's come in to replace him. And then Lockie Ferguson didn't play because he was battling with injury. I keep forgetting Mark Chapman got injured. I just, you know, it felt like a little bit interchangeable between him and Jimmy Neesham there. But Mark Chapman was back from injury for that game as well. It's just like looking at the injuries that they've suffered, and I forgot about Michael Bracewell. And I was watching that game thinking, you know what Mark Chapman has done with the bat in this World Cup, it's been quite good. Like, it's a little bit of a specific role. I don't love the idea of a specialist batsman at 7 when you've already short on bowlers in your lineup, but that is, when I was thinking of along those lines, that is a response to the fact that they wanted someone to do what Michael Bracewell can do with the bat. And they found someone who can do what he does with the bat. But he doesn't also do what Michael Bracewell does with the ball, which isn't be an amazing bowler by any means. But I think he would have been more effective at this World Cup with his offies than Rachin Ravindra has been, for example. And I wouldn't imagine he'd be any less effective. Well, it doesn't really matter, because you'd still have Glenn Phillips doing that. But the fact that Glenn Phillips has been able to be quite useful just bowling these flat little off spinners, well, Michael Bracewell can do that too. And operate that in that sort of number 7 closing hitter kind of thing. I was thinking through that, for all the injuries we've had to watch the Blackcaps deal with, obviously none was bigger than Kane Williamson, but Michael Bracewell's is the next biggest. Like, I'd almost rather have him than Matt Henry at this point, because Henry also he's been very good in games where he's been very good, and he's been bad in games where he's been bad. It's a little weird one, but I think a lot of the seamers at this stage of the World Cup seem to be struggling now, and scores are getting higher, and the ball's not swinging, and fatigue is setting in, and whatever. And that's been tricky. Like, I've noticed Trent Bolt just hasn't been getting the power play wickets that he ordinarily would, and I guess that's pretty much specifically because the ball's not moving for him. He's getting his wickets later in the innings when he's coming back and doing death bowler stuff. So it's a lot of adversity that the Blackcaps have had to deal with, adversity rather, throughout this World Cup. And It started a long time ago. That's the weird thing. Is the frustrating build-ups were set up and with Williamson's injury and then Bracewell's injury like months in advance, and now they're getting similar setbacks days in advance or just random. It's such a weird World Cup campaign, but they're still in it. They beat Sri Lanka. They did enough because of their first innings that Pakistan didn't overturn any net run rate stuff. They just have to. Well, they also need Afghanistan to drop points because Afghanistan technically can win out and finish above the Black Caps, but they face Australia and South Africa to come. So I think maybe that's like two top three teams. That's you would assume that would be beyond them, but the Black Caps just beat Sri Lanka and we're through. That easier said than done at this point in time, but I still think the way they've played against most of these teams, excluding the South Africa game, the way they've played should have, they could easily have won that game against Australia. They probably would still have won this game against Pakistan had the rain not come. They could have been 2-2 across the stretch and there's no dramas. Like, I don't think they're necessarily playing bad cricket. They just got to do the old performing with bat and ball in the same game and see how that goes. That might be the trick. That might be the thing that swings it for them, is if you actually take some wickets and score some runs in the same game.
Afghanistan have a net run rate of negative 0.3. The Black Caps have a net run rate of 0.3. So they have a little advantage there. There's a lot to unpack with what you said, and I've got many of these notes will appear in the Monday newsletter. Let's start with Kane Williamson. Let's start with the Bracewell thing, because everyone's mentioning the Black Caps injuries, but they never mention Bracewell.
And I forgot about it.
Yeah, and he was being developed for this World Cup. And I'd also suggest, it's Rachin Ravindra mania at the moment. Fair play. The kid is performing at the highest level, and I don't want to poo-poo what's happening. But everything about Rachin Ravindra's cricketing journey features India. He went to India as a youngster. He went to India as an adult to perform in India. He made his test debut in India. Like, Rachin Ravindra's journey to this moment features a lot of India, and it's not surprising he's doing these performances in India. I'm curious how that looks as a consistent member of Black Caps first 11s around the world, because I don't think he's obviously going to play a lot of cricket for the Black Caps a lot across all three formats, but I don't think he's going to perform in this way in the other formats in other countries. Like, he's going to be a figure in the test series against Bangladesh because you need spinning all-rounders. But just keep that in mind about Rachin Ravindra and the mania surrounding him, because so much of his cricketing development was spent in India. Like, he is a specialist for playing in India, and that is evident in his performances. Kane Williamson is a specialist of scoring runs. His last 5 games, he has scores of 4 and 132 in a test against England, 121 not out, 215 in test against Sri Lanka, 78 not out, and 95. So his last 5 games, what's he got? 7 innings. He's got 2 centuries, a double century, a 78, and a 95. So he's either going below 10 or above 70. And he's going over 70 in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 of the 7 innings, he's going over 70, which is pretty crazy. And that's Kane Williamson, who also just happens to average 65 in World Cups.
Which I think someone said is the best ever mark for anyone over a, I'm not sure what the qualifying mark was, because obviously I didn't count. There's bound to have been someone who played 1 game and scored 90 or something like that. But I think over a certain amount of runs or certain amount of games played, it's, nobody's been better at World Cups.
And turns out he might be important to the Black Caps. If he's playing, it's going to be quite helpful for the Black Caps. There's also the Kyle Jamieson factor, and this ties into the bowling, because the Black Caps have gone against India. They batted first, and India kind of cruised along, 274 for 6, 5.7 RPO. Australia 388, South Africa 357, Pakistan 200. All the last 3 games they've conceded over 7 runs and over. Like, you're not going to win World Cup games if you're doing that. And now you've got Kyle Jamieson coming into the squad, and Kyle Jamieson does have a bit of X factor, but I've got no idea how Kyle Jamieson's going to perform because he's never played an ODI or a T20 in India. He had a bit of an iffy IPL series as well. Then we go into his work this year. T20s he's averaging 21.8, ODIs he's averaging 71.6. So there is nothing to predict what Kyle Jamieson is going to do if or when he gets this opportunity in this World Cup. We've got no previous white ball performances for the Blackcaps in India. He's been really good in T20s this year. He's been pretty bad in ODIs this year. There's no clarity.
There was a reason why he didn't get picked in the first place. At this point, it was an injury because he had been playing in Bangladesh. He was fit and available. He was close. He was there as a travelling reserve. Then he went back, played a Plunket Shield game, and now he's back as not even a reserve. He's just been called into the squad. So it's been a weird one.
Like, I can see how it's better to have Kyle Jamieson in the squad. Like, Matt Henry, he's an important figure of the ODI squad. He's a great ODI bowler. But if he's bowling alongside Trent Boult and Tim Southey, and they're all kind of doing the same thing, and the ball's not really nibbling, it's not really swinging. However, India, they're moving the ball every which way. So surely...
Yeah, dubious, but... Yeah.
Settle down.
They just got the most skilled bowlers, basically.
And I actually think the best bowlers are going to win this World Cup. Like, in a World Cup where so many runs are being scored, the best bowlers will win the World Cup. The bowling,
which will be India at this point.
Could be the Blackcaps, because what we're saying about winning and losing, it would be fantastic if India went undefeated through pool play and couldn't win the World Cup. That would be great.
I saw someone saying it would be the best thing for the Cricket World Cup, like the ODI World Cup in the future, because it'll mean that they have to play another one because India will have to go back and get revenge. They bowled out. What did they do to South Africa overnight? 84, yeah, and they bowled out Sri Lanka for 55 in the previous game, Australia for 120 something in the game before that. So their last, and they scored 350 odd against South Africa. So that innings alone was more than the last 3 teams against them have done combined. Pop quiz though, who's got the highest score against India as a team in this tournament?
Oh, the Blackcaps.
Yeah, it's the Blackcaps. 1 run better than what Afghanistan did, although Afghanistan's total was chased down with 15 overs to spare and won by about 8 wickets, whereas we at least took them closer when we played against India.
So my point I think I was trying to make was Kyle Jamieson's got a bit of pizzazz. He's tall. Everyone needs to know Kyle Jamieson doesn't necessarily bowl fast. Like, he's 135 Ks at best, maybe pushing 138 on a good day. But he does at least offer something different. So I can see how that might be better for the Blackcaps. We love Matt Henry, but I think he's pretty plain Jane in this situation. But there's nothing to suggest Kyle Jamieson will be a factor. There's also nothing to suggest he's going to suck. It's just like it's murky estuary waters. Like, we're deep in the mangroves and you can't see the bottom of the estuary because it's an estuary. And there's mangroves and it's murky. That's the Kyle Jamieson situation at the moment. So I'm curious how that plays out. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm just thinking on that note, like, because he does offer a point of difference with his height. Like, that is a true thing. And the thing that our other bowlers are best at, Matt Henry just nibbling the ball around, and Southey getting a bit of movement, Boult especially getting that early ball swing stuff. None of that's happening in these conditions. So Jamieson's point of difference, just with his height and a little bit of extra bounce off a good length, does become a little bit more relevant there, because that's something that's still going to hold up. And I think it's been a factor that's really helped Lockie Ferguson, is just the fact he's been able to be quicker than other guys. When everyone is struggling a bit, his pace is still going to be there. And he might well be back for this Sri Lanka game. I'm not sure how they're going, but I'm imagining if they didn't think he could be back for Sri Lanka, I don't think he'd still be with the squad. It's the last game of pool play, and if they lose, they're probably out. So I wonder if there's a point at which Jamieson and Ferguson both play this Sri Lanka game. I wonder if that's something to consider. And you know what? Something else I was considering along the way is whether, and I don't think that game against Pakistan necessarily eased this idea either, because you saw them going for the big slugger stuff towards the end, and as a result, you saw Tom Latham dropping further and further down the batting order. I wondered if maybe there might be consideration towards dropping Tom Latham when Kane Williamson came back and give Devon Conway the gloves. It would be a rough one because Latham coming into this tournament is the best batter we've had in Indian conditions in ODIs. Like he's the guy with the best average. He was averaging more than Williamson. No longer true because Rachin Ravindra apparently is just, Rachin equals Sachin or something like that. But I did wonder if that might be a hot take idea of going somewhere different with the number 5 position, where Tom Latham hadn't quite been scoring. It had got a couple 50s, but he'd also been scoring slower than he probably would have liked to, and whatever. In the end, they just went with the obvious one of dropping Will Young and moving Ravindra into opening. But it was something I was pondering, just in terms of the balance of the squad as much as anything. Although you would be losing a lot with the wicket keeping, because Latham, I think, has been pretty excellent with the gloves so far. So it's not something I expected, but it was something that I did wonder about, with the guy who'd been captaining their team in the absence of the normal captain might get dropped so that the captain could come back in. And they didn't. He moved him, slid him down that batting order to get the sluggers in towards the end. But I do actually think that's just good practice. Yeah. That's what you should be doing in that situation. So,
and
yeah.
Latham is the most versatile batter with Williamson in that lineup. Like, they both can play a whole bunch of different roles, and it was there was a lot of talk about the lefties in the lineup, and it's like, well, Tom Latham's a lefty. Like, lefties are coming in ahead of him, but he's also a lefty. So it's obvious what they're trying to do. They're just trying to go smack, 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 probably because they knew they needed to go smack, 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 whack, 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 because that ground plus Pakistan, as you mentioned, a lot of history with Fakhar Zaman, they knew what was coming, so you need to score as many runs as possible. Kane Williamson showed that with his dismissal, and then every batter who came in after him had a whack. So it was clear what they were trying to do. And we'll wait and see. They face Sri Lanka. And again, I said before the Pakistan game, if the Black Caps can't defeat Pakistan, they don't really deserve to be in the semi-finals. But Duckworth, Lewis, and Steve put a bit of a deucer in that one. So,
inconclusive in that response, I'd say.
But I can say, regardless of Sri Lanka playing in subcontinent conditions, if you can't beat Sri Lanka, you don't deserve to be in the semi-finals at this stage of the tournament. And that's where the Black Caps are at. Plunket Shield cricket is happening at the moment. Just one note, you do have Will O'Rourke has returned to the Canterbury lineup. So that's a fun little wrinkle for Canterbury in the Plunket Shield. And we also had 2 wins for the Wellington Phoenix. The women defeated Brisbane Roar 2-1. Fantastic goal from Anuli Longo and the Wellington Phoenix women. They have 2 wins, 1 loss, 3rd on the ladder. Big up. The Wellington Phoenix men had a 5-2 victory over the Brisbane Roar. They are also 3rd on the ladder, 2 wins, 1 draw. There's 4 teams on 7 points, and the Wellington Phoenix are one of those points, so big up. Do you want to weave your way through both Wellington Phoenix teams and victories, or do you want to kind of segment them?
I'm not sure. It's been an interesting parallel between those 2 teams coming into the thing, because it's felt like the women have gotten more serious about, like, just win now moves. We're bringing in imports where changing the coach again wasn't something they meant to do, but it's something that they found themselves having to do. But this Paul Temple from day one has been very impressive in how he's handled that stuff. I think he's an excellent coach anyway, so no dramas there. But it felt like they'd had a couple of seasons where they were trying to find their footing in the A-League, and now it was like, no, we know what we're doing, and we are just straight up coming out and saying, like, no moral victories or no sort of, oh well, we tried, but we can handle the consolation kind of stuff. Like none of that. They're just out there being like, no, we intend to make the finals this year. And we think we're good enough, and we're going to do all we can to achieve that. Whereas the men seem to be making moves that suggested, well, we'd like to make the finals, we'll try to win, but if we don't, at least we can fall back upon the thing that we've got like good young players, academy players getting opportunities, Kiwi youngsters filling out our squad, and we're developing for the future, which is kind of what the women's team did in the first 2 years. They weren't necessarily academy players because the academy just wasn't at that, they had to build the academy up to that point where they are probably now. Let's say now they probably are at that stage, but before it was just bringing through Kiwi youngsters in general and more or less built around the last under 20 World Cup squad. At least a large portion of it was. So it sort of felt like they were doing opposite things in opposite directions, but we've had very similar outcomes from them so far, including games where they've been able to win by scoring a lot of goals, which neither team seemed to be capable of. We didn't really get that from the women on the weekend against Brisbane. They won 2-1. Could have won by more if they'd been a little bit sharper. It was like a 1-0 scoreline for a long time, but they did have that game against Western Sydney the other week where they won 3-0, 3-0, 3-1. I think it's 3-0, where they did run up the score towards the end and cashed in and scored some lovely goals and played some good creative footy in patches, but still, those patches were there. They weren't there last year. They were there this time. And the men on the weekend, giving it the old 5-2 against Brisbane, scoring 5. I don't know when the last time they scored 5 goals in one game was, but I doubt it was. I don't think they did it last year. And they were 1-0 down inside of a minute, of like 34 seconds or something. They were losing, and like if that had happened to them last season, wheels would have fallen off, because you're thinking, well, this is already a team that struggles to score goals. Now they have to come from behind inside the first minute at home, and pressure's on, and can we do this? Are they capable? And they just fell into their patterns and did nice stuff and played some good footy, took control of the game. Didn't create heaps of chances, but the ones they did create, they were able to take. And that's the key thing, is they had clinical finishing, which I haven't seen that for a long time from this team. And so I think there are a lot of parallels between the two teams that you can look at, even though they've seemingly gone to opposite directions to get to a midpoint. I think the midpoint they've found is kind of the same thing for both of them. It's a team full of a lot of good young Kiwi players with a few more experienced sort of A-League heads around them to lock things down, and then some mostly quality imports, although I think in both of those cases you can argue there are imports in that team who are being outperformed by younger Kiwi players around them. However, both do have an import striker who seem to be capable of scoring goals, so that's a very important thing for them. Zavada with a hat-trick, Speckmeyer with another goal on the weekend. It's good areas for the Wellington Phoenix, I suppose, is when you can find that, because trying to get that kind of top to bottom, as above, so below kind of consistency throughout the club, and both the men's and women's systems has led them kind of to a place where now the men's and women's systems compared to each other are also in a similar spot. I haven't been this buzzed about Wellington Phoenix footy for a while, because it genuinely feels like they've got the best of both worlds in a way, where they have that development stuff, but they also seem to be very competitive, and a lot of those younger players are stepping up. Like Macy Fraser has been excellent this season for the women. Lucas Kelly-Hield, Alex Paulson, Finn Sermon for the blokes. Like the levels to which they're rising to the occasion are pretty impressive. And at the moment, I want to watch more Phoenix games. I watch the games on the weekends, and I just think, well, this is fun. I can't wait till next week to do it again.
Sounds like a lot like how I was feeling watching the New Zealand Warriors play NRL footy this season. Yeah. My count, I've got 12 goals scored combined across both teams and 5 goals conceded. So it's, to your point about the Wellington Phoenix club scoring goals and playing entertaining footy to get the wins and bring in the crowds, they're averaging 2 goals a game. Both teams have played a combined 6 games. They've scored 12 goals. Easy math, I think. And it looks like they've only conceded 5 goals combined, which is fantastic defense as well. What were you alluding to with the coaching and your intrigue around Paul Temple? And I'm not sure how you get from chief to chiefy. Like, I'm not sure about the semantics and the
Yeah, it's like
makeup
a
of.
nickname for a nickname, eh?
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
he becomes chief, but then he becomes chiefy because chief isn't like, I don't know, it's too formal or something. It feels like a proper title, so they have to add a Y onto. I don't know, but that is interchangeable within the squad as well. They do that. They'll call him chief or chiefy.
It does seem like um, communities where you do have a chief, whether it's like I don't like some sort of sergeant, police officer, or some ancient culture and tribe that would have a chief of the tribe. It does seem like, okay, you're the chief, but we're going to call you chiefy.
Yeah, it's like the formal, but then informalizing the formal bit it is a bit of a weird one. But then maybe that's just unique to Mr. Giancarlo Italiano. I don't know. Um, yeah, well, point about the coaching stuff and the intrigue there is just that they, because it's not just as much as the continuity factor is there for the Phoenix, because both of these coaches were hired from within the system, as the ones before. Well, Talai wasn't, but the previous women's coach was also hired. Nat Lawrence came as from an assistant into the first team job. Um, Paul Temple wasn't an assistant, but he was he's sort of head of women's football and coaching the reserves team, and then he moves up to the first team gig, and Italiano obviously assistant to first team. So there's continuity there, but I also seems like they're both implementing a style of football that is quite different to what came before them. I think that's more noticeable probably with the men, um, but it's still there with the women, where you see there's a different formation. Both of them have changed their formation this year. You're seeing different different intents, I suppose, is the word, with how they go about their passing game. The men are a little bit more keen to pass out from the back now. Women already kind of were, but you're seeing a different kind of thing where they're looking for short passes, quick short passes, 1-2 touch stuff in order to get out of the clogged areas and then attack at pace. Men doing similar things and then looking to switch the play or play like runners going forward down the line, these kind of things. One thing with Italiano in particular that has kind of fascinated me, because we've seen a little bit more of them because we got to see them in the Aussie Cup a couple of times, and we got to see them in the Aussie Cup in a form that was not their fully furnished kind of, or the fully furnished room. They were still, it was midway through preseason, so obviously they hadn't got to everything yet. But the way they played there is quite different to what they've played here. But then also the way they've played throughout the 3 games so far, there's been notable differences between them. Like against Brisbane on the weekend, you really saw them gunning with the fullbacks, to where you'd often get early in possession, you'd get like it was usually the Rufa or maybe Altai just dropping in between the centre backs so that the centre backs can go a bit wider, so that they're covering more, almost sitting in the back 3 with the ball. And you really, like Tim Payne especially, but Kelly Hill did it a bit as well on the let, just really gunning for. I mean, I heard I think Spoonley on commentary at one point said that compared it to like a slingshot. I thought that was quite a good thing. It's like as soon as it goes, it's like, snap and off he goes. In those situations, like looking for those little trigger situations, and Payne was just getting real high. But then that also meant that their 3 front players. So Zavada was just the target man, the hold up dude on the last man, playing with his back to goal sometimes, running in behind other times, but especially looking to be like a physical presence, which he's very good at. His layoff stuff is fantastic. But you had Kraev and Costa Barbarosas hanging off him, not playing wide, but almost drifting infield to where they were both like number 10s behind them, but they would switch from side to side. So there'd be 2 of them on one side and no one on the other side, or 2 of them on the other side, swapping. And that's just creating room for like the fullbacks to use that width instead. And this is not necessarily something we saw from them in the previous game. And I don't know, when you're getting new season or new coach or kind of thing, you just need to see the team enough to be able to, like, the first time you see them, it's all the evidence you've got to go by. You see them, and then the stuff they do in that game, you assume they're going to do in every game because that's all you got. And then you watch them again, you start to be able to compare that game to the next second game, and then you what's in common, what's different, stuff that's in common after 3-4 games. Then you start to realize, okay, that's like the base identity. That's the stuff they're going to try to do every game. I mean, from Italiano, he seems to be a coach. The impression I get so far is he seems to be a coach who's going to make notable adjustments from week to week. So we're still, not really deep enough to have an idea on what the stuff is that's going to linger every week. But I would imagine the formation is going to be one of them. The passing transitional stuff is going to be another. They've got hard tacklers in midfield. That kind of stuff that the way they use Savada is probably not going to change much, but there's stuff that they seem to alternate from game to game. And that's the fascinating stuff. It's like the tactical approach it must have been specific to Brisbane. I don't know enough about Brisbane to say why they thought that Tim Payne going forward was going to be such a key factor, but it was. Got a goal. I think he got an assist as well. He had an excellent performance. He was real good the week before as well. Like, there's a lot of tactical wrinkles to how the Phoenix have been playing, and I think there's some of this stuff as well with the women's team under Paul Temple too, which is probably a little more sophisticated as well than what they've done in the past. Certainly compared to Talai, I think Talai was very structured in how we wanted a team that could pass and control, but it was a little bit less. You stay in your position, you stay in your position. On the weekend, we saw like fullbacks operating as wingers and wingers operating as central playmakers and this kind of thing. So there's another reason to want to watch them over and over, is just to get a gauge on what's the baseline here. Like, what's the stuff that changes from week to week based on their opponent, and what's the baseline?
It is fun to watch you relive my Warriors experience like that. You're describing.
I honestly, I've thought similar things about how I even said on previous podcasts how similar this stuff is, because the Warriors did the same thing throughout.
Yeah, it's all very similar to the Warriors, but we need to touch on if you've got a National League big thing, and if you do, is their National League big thing Gianni Bazookas and his rocket into the bottom right-hand corner. Excellent goal for Wellington Olympic. You can take it from here.
Well, it can be that, sure. I mean, that was also a very important game, right? That was the fact it was his 100th goal for Wellington Olympic. That's cool. Like, it matters more to Wellington Olympic fans than it does to the general National League fan, but it does show, like, here's a really good striker who scores a lot of goals, for sure, especially because he scored 100 goals in 127 games, I think, for them. And that's not all. Like, it's close to obviously the bulk of that was scored in Central League games, and some of those will be against weaker teams where he can cash in, but he's scored at a pretty slick rate throughout the National League in the last few years as well. So that's not something you can hold against him. Like, obviously, I think, anyway, I won't go on a tangent, but that game was Wellington Olympic versus Christchurch United. It was the second place team against the third place team, pretty much a quarterfinal. Like, well, not even a quarterfinal, because there's only a grand final, so semi-final. So you call it a semi-final. Olympics still have 2 more games to see through, but up against Christchurch United, biggest game of the season. These two had separated themselves as the most likely contenders against Auckland City, but Auckland City have won 7 out of 7, so no one's catching them. They're going through to the grand final to try to defend their title, and it's really just who is going to make the final to compete against them. It's going to be one of these two teams. So this was a massive game, like the second most important game of the entire season, really. And Wellington Olympic were 3-0 up after 25 minutes. Like, the biggest game of the season, they just did that thing that they do where they just come out like bloody house on fire or whatever. It's just all energy, just runners everywhere, just swarming them and scoring goals. And Bazookas got them started with a beauty of a finish. Then Gavin Hoy also scored later on, and Gavin Hoy and Gianni Bazookas have both now scored in 4 consecutive games. Like, it's one thing for one dude to score in 4 consecutive games. They've got 2 players in the same team who have scored in 4 consecutive games. After half an hour, it got tricky for them, though, because they got a red card. And the red card was for like a high boot, which I thought was maybe a little bit harsh. It's dude kicked the guy in the chest. So you can't be like, well, you put yourself in a position where the referee had to make a decision, as they say. I thought they should have had a penalty a little bit earlier, and the dude got booked for diving, which I was surprised about. And then there was a similar effort where Christchurch United got a penalty in the second half. So I think Wellington Olympic might feel like some of the refereeing stuff might have been a little bit edgy against them. But that's why you go 3-0. Like, how many times do you hear that after a football game? A coach complains or players have getting upset at the referee because they feel like that swung the game. Like, well, no one has to say that at Wellington Olympic because, well, first of all, those were like 50-50 decisions at worst. Like you can easily justify all of them. It's not like there were hella decisions against them. You might well argue that all of those things were correct, but it doesn't matter if you're 3-0 up already. They had to play an hour with 10 men. They were 3-0 up at the point they had to go an hour with 10 men. Like that's the best situation you can put yourself in. And the rest of the game ended up 2-2, so they won 5-2. And we'll probably get to repeat the dose against Auckland City in a few weeks. They lost to them in a classic grand final last year, in which, from memory, Auckland City had to play a long while with 10 men. I think Cam Howison got sent off in that one. Auckland City were good enough to manage the game with 10 and win that grand final because they won everything last year. Wellington Olympic have won everything they come up against locally, but they've had trouble getting past Auckland City in the last few years. That is very much the final hurdle, the big boss that they have to overcome. And thanks to an outrageously good first half hour in particular, but the way they managed the game after that was still pretty good, pretty fantastic. Thanks to that, they're going to probably get another chance in 2 more weeks to see the latest opportunity to see if they can topple Auckland City's dynasty.
Beauty. That is the Niche Cast. You can read all that National League stuff. A lot of deep dive content coming up on our website, theniche-case.com. Big up yourself. Love yourself. Kia kaha. Stay beautiful. Churcher.